Okay, it's been a long day, has it? We're all still alive. So it's a real privilege to be here to talk to you and explore your work. I'm a really big fan, and I think you have just extraordinarily extensive experience in the industry, and you have unique experience in two areas. One is obviously the experience of being a cinematographer, and also then the experience of being a director. And so I'm very keen to hear the experience from both sides and hear your insights there, and hopefully get a few tips. And the other area that you have a lot of experience in both areas is feature film direction, and then directing television series, especially as a pilot director. And they're quite different roles in how they're defined. So I'm very curious to hear more about how you handle both of those roles. And I have obviously lots of questions. The first thing, I just wanted to talk a little bit, first of all, just about growing up. And one of the things when I was reading what Reed has said was that she referenced her contact lenses. And I was just curious about that because I also was born very short-sighted, and I think it definitely influenced my kind of the way I see the world, my visual reality. And living in a world of blur for the first 7 years had an impact in how you recognize people just by their clothes or by the sound they make as they walk, because everyone has a slightly different walk, or there's all these little clues you have to rely on because you can't rely on the detail. And I was wondering, is that similar for you?
Well, I thought that was interesting that you brought that up, but I'm not sure. I mean, I didn't get glasses until I was probably well into kindergarten, when the teacher said to my mother, do you know that your daughter can't see anything? And I don't really remember that much, but it's true actually when I think about the memories that I have before that. They are like very blurry, and you don't know if they're blurry because they're memories or if they were blurry because they were actually literally blurry. So yeah, it's an interesting thought though, because if you think about it, when I take my contacts out now, my glasses off now, things don't come into focus until they're this close, and maybe there's some kind of correlation there because I think if you're, for me, I have to always I want to get as close as possible, either really, really wide or as close as possible to my subjects. And so then, it's kind of, maybe there's something related there.
It's interesting. I know for me, being close meant literally, if I didn't have my glasses, my desk was pushed forward more and more and more till it was literally touching the blackboard.
Yeah.
So also, the other thing, I know you've talked a lot about confidence and learning through doing, and if you don't know how to do something, maybe either find out the person who can do it or say you can do it. And I'm wondering, as a child growing up, were you confident as a child?
I don't think so. I was actually kind of kept to myself. I used to write when I was young, and I wasn't super outgoing. I was definitely more of an introvert, and I think maybe it was once I had glasses, or I don't know what it was, but I really liked, maybe I had an imagination. I have a 9-year-old son who's very imaginative, and a 7-year-old son who's very outgoing. And the imaginative one is a little bit more, keeps to himself. And I was like, maybe that's what I was like when I was younger. So I don't know, I think I felt safer if I didn't have to put myself out there. So I would say probably not so much with the confidence when I was younger.
You're more of an observer.
Yeah, more of an observer. And so when when I was in about 3rd grade, my dad brought back a video camera from Japan, and it was like one of the first consumer video cameras. It was one of those giant JVC ones that you put pretty much it's like a VHS, like a high-8 tape within a VHS tape or something like that. And it was, you could fade in and out. And he basically brought it back and was like, "You're going to become the family documentarian." And I was kind of like, I don't really want to do that, because I knew it meant I would have to go in people's faces with the camera, and I might have to actually talk to them or interact with them, and I didn't want to do that. And then I realized, actually, the camera's pretty great, because even though you do kind of have to put yourself out there, you feel like you're not, because you're behind the camera.
Right, you're kind of hidden a little bit.
It makes you do things that you wouldn't normally do.
Right, that's interesting. You had a lot of changes in your background growing up. You moved quite a few times, and you had changes within the home and the family makeup and things like that. Did that have a big impact on you?
I think it did, because at the time I was very annoyed by it, but I got to go to a lot of different environments. And actually, as I got older, I guess I did get a little bit better at adapting, because we were, constantly moving schools. I think I was in 11 schools growing up before I even got to high school. So you have to constantly, integrate yourself into new environments, and also meeting totally different kinds of people. And every new environment I went into, I was a different sort of, I was in a different world within that environment. Like in one environment, maybe I only had one friend, and I was the nerd, and then like I went to another environment and I was kind of like this cool tomboy, and then I went to another environment and I was this creative writing geek, and then when I went, and I didn't socialize or go out or do anything, and then I moved to another environment, and I came out of my shell and made friends. And so it was weird, because it gives you that opportunity to sort of figure out who you are, or maybe even
by trying out literally trying different identities.
If you're at different stages in your life when you're growing up, you actually do become different people, and so it's like interesting to change, to be able to completely start over with new people who have no preconceived notion about who you are. Right,
which is quite different, I think, to most of us in Ireland. Ireland's such a small place; everybody knows everybody, so you're afraid to do anything or step out of line. So very different experience. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about your father? I know he was kind of pivotal in giving you that camera in that choice of career, but also just about the impact he had on you.
Well, he was very, he was kind of known for any crazy idea he had, or business he wanted to start, or thing that he wanted to do, he would just do it. He would say that he wanted to do it, and everyone would be like, "Oh, Casey, you're crazy," and he would do it anyway. And he always did it. He always achieved every one of his goals. And what was interesting was he dabbled in a little bit of everything. He was everything from, he started a restaurant, he did landscaping, but like really into gardening, like very amazing with gardening. And he ended up opening up the first head shop in Long Island, like back in the 70s, and the reason he started a restaurant wasn't even because he thought, I want to be a restaurateur. It was because my grandfather gambled away in my grandmother's house, and he was trying to think of a way for the family to make money for forever without, any worry. And he was like, okay, they're Italian, they can cook. So he went to this place called Fire Island in New York, where it was sort of an up-and-coming resort place, and he basically collected all this driftwood off of the beach, and they built the restaurant out of driftwood. Wow. And it's still there. So
that's amazing. And unfortunately, he died, I believe, when you were 18.
Yeah,
so that must have had a huge impact on you.
Yeah, it was actually right before, he was the one who suggested that I go to film school. He was the one that gave me the video camera, and, he kind of, whether anybody wants to admit it or not, he always kind of had this grand plan that he was pushing everybody in the direction, and the person he probably could do that the most with was me, because he spent the most time, with me growing up. So he had, you're going to go to film, I applied to BU for journalism, and he was like, you're going to go to film school, actually, I think, And I was like, wait. He's like, why don't you apply to NYU Film School? And he's like, you like taking pictures and you like telling stories, so it just seems like the right thing to do. And I was like, but is that like really a real thing, like a real job? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, that sounds like a lot better than going to school for journalism, which I wasn't super excited about anyway. It just felt like a real job that a person should have. And so then I applied, because of him, I applied to NYU, and his plan was sort of that we would make movies together. And then I went to NYU, and it's just very interesting how he kind of knew what the right path would be. So,
right, yeah. You also mentioned 2 films, My Life as a Dog and Requiem for a Dream, as being 2 films that had a big impact on you, and I was curious because I remember the first time I saw My Life as a Dog as well, and it really touched me. And it's very disarming in its simplicity and portrayal of innocence. Any other films or any other big influences growing up?
Let's see. I mean, I loved adventure movies growing up, so I really enjoyed. I was obsessed with all the Indiana Jones movies and the Star Wars movies, and it's sort of not really a genre anymore. Adventure movie. It's either it's an action movie or it's not. You know. And I also I loved movie. I remember the first time I saw Raising Arizona. And that was, I remember that really affected me because it was the first time I actually noticed how the choice of lenses on it, and this was I was young when I saw it, and I noticed the lenses were different, and maybe that was what was making this humorous to me.
Interesting.
And that was the first time I was ever like aware of how movies manipulate you beyond the obvious, like music and things like that.
Right, that's interesting. And then from film school, did you kind of graduate in cinematography, or were there specific areas that you graduate in, or how did that work?
Well, I decided to concentrate on cinematography, but I still directed some films in film school because that was originally what I went to school for. And it was just that the first shoot I went as a PA on to was like a third year level color sync class project, and I just thought what the DP was doing was fascinating, and I didn't even really understand anything. I didn't know what an apple box was or anything, and I just was kind of watching him take light readings and measuring to the subject, and the other thing I kind of noted was, because at this level, also at that time when I went to NYU, they were only shooting film, so it was all 16 and 35. And I just thought what was really cool was that nobody could see what he was shooting, but everything that the audience would see, they would see it through his eyes. And I was thinking, like, that's the job I want to have.
That's a lot of power.
And at that level, it kind of feels like the DP has a lot of power, even if it's harder to see when you're new on a set to understand what the effect that a director has over things.
The director is the one who has absolutely nothing to do. He's the only one on set that actually is wandering around with no job. I know you've shot a lot of shorts and a lot of documentaries, and I'd be curious just to know about how you feel about short films, because I know in Ireland we I think excel at short films. I think we've make a lot of short films, and a lot of them have been really high quality here. And I personally love the medium of a short film, and the idea that the element of surprise, you've no idea what the story will be about or the format. I mean, you've total creative freedom. And likewise documentaries. I think there's been some amazing Irish documentaries made in the last year, just both universal in scope and incredible. So do you want to talk a little bit just about starting off the first projects and maybe what they taught you?
I think what was good about it was learning how to DP, on short films, because the stakes seem lower, and you're given sort of a set task, and then you can kind of move to a larger and larger format. But what I liked about it was you could shoot a lot of short films in a short amount of time, and you get to go on a bunch of different adventures, which is why I really also wanted to be a cinematographer, because at the time when I went to film school, I wasn't thinking like, oh, I have all the answers, I know what my point of view is, and I have all these stories I want to tell. I was more thinking, I want to see if I can visually interpret all these different stories and push myself to try to figure out what someone else's vision is. And so doing a bunch of different shorts was really helpful, because I could shoot anything from, I shot like a ninja movie at one point that was a short film, and then I shot a love story, and you can kind of like jump around to different genres very quickly and get a world of experience in a smaller amount of time. And also it's like, it is the sort of simplest way to figure out if you can put together a film that's going to entertain people. And I actually think in many ways shorts great shorts are harder to make than
Yeah.
features, because you're given such a small amount of time to draw the audience in, get them invested, and then, you know, give them that great twist,
True.
whatever it may be. And I always found it difficult with shorts for me to, you know, mine were more probably documentary style when I did mine. They didn't make a lot of sense. But you really want to find like that hook, and that's what shorts are like. It's like, how do you tell a great, memorable story and give memorable characters, and you have less than 15 minutes to do it, you know? And that to me is a way bigger challenge, actually. So I have a lot of respect for that. And documentary was what I really I really also gravitated towards documentary because it allowed me to kind of be observational, which is how I started out when I was shooting with my dad's video camera. And, you know, there is that. I also think to edit a documentary is so difficult, much more difficult, I think, than editing a feature. And because it's almost, in many ways, you don't really know what the narrative is going to really be until you have all the footage. And that's what's kind of great about it. It's kind of exciting about it. And bringing the audience into this world that they would not have normally experienced. So, but I think it was a great experience for me because it taught me a lot, from a camera perspective, about, you know, bedside manner and being not seen, and finding a way to make people comfortable around the camera and getting real, authentic moments. And that's the type of thing you can carry with you to when you work on a narrative film. So.
Right. And working on Beyonce's Lemonade, how was that experience?
That was...
How did that come about?
I had been shooting for this director, Mark Romanek. I shot like some commercials for him, and he had worked on vinyl. So I knew him from that. And he had called and said, "Are you available to shoot this music video? And don't tell anybody, but it's Beyonce." And I was like, yes, I'm available.
Let me check my diary.
Yeah, I was like, I'll do it. Actually, he called me. I had gotten called to shoot, what was the first video that came out in that group? I'm trying to remember. There was a first video that came out, and I actually got called to DP that, and I couldn't take it. The reason why I couldn't take it was because I had a meeting scheduled for a movie, which is the movie that I'm shooting here right now.
Oh, wow.
And that meeting ended up not happening because a blizzard came to New York and I couldn't get to LA, and I gave up shooting that first Beyonce video which was part of Lemonade, actually. I don't know why I'm like blanking on what it's called. It's the first one, like single that came out. But so then I went and did this one, Sandcastles, with Mark, and he wanted me to do it because he was like, "Oh, I want you to have this." I wanted to have a very intimate, naturalistic, you know, he knew that I could get very intimate with the characters, and so he wanted to feel very like we were seeing something private that we wouldn't normally see. And he knew I could make people feel comfortable around the camera. So he was like, "I'm just gonna leave you in the room with Beyonce and Jay, and like you're gonna just be alone with them in the room, and with the focus puller, and basically, you know, just we'll get these moments with them." So that's basically what happened. It was pretty cool. It was very. I wasn't ever really allowed to talk about it because right when it came out, they didn't. Beyonce's company didn't let any of the directors or cinematographers do any press, and I got so many calls. I know we all did, that wanted to know what happened, but I mean, it's long enough time has passed, I think. But the one thing I did note was that, and also having been a really big fan of hers for so long, and of his, was that when the two of them were in the room together and she was singing that song, it was very clear that it wasn't an act. It was like there was something going on.
Right.
And they were both getting emotional. So it really felt like I'm totally like seeing something I shouldn't be seeing right now.
Wow.
But it was very cool. And I just kind of was respectful of it and, you know, tried to
capture it.
Yeah, just to capture it. Yeah.
I mean, the relationship between cinematographer and director is obviously the key creative collaboration. So how is that from, you can tell the truth here, how is that from the cinematographer's point of view in terms of, you know, the just the interactions and the boundaries, I guess?
Well, I mean, I think there were directors that I worked for that I, you know, just felt like they didn't understand what they didn't have the bedside manner. I think that was the biggest thing, that the biggest issue I've ever had with anybody was always about, like, how do you treat the crew? How do you treat your DP? How do you treat your actors? And I worked for, you know, so many different directors. I worked for directors who couldn't have been more kind and wonderful, and I would, like, follow them to the ends of the earth to do anything for them. And I even still, some of these directors, even though I'm not shooting for other people anymore, if I had nothing going on and they needed me and I had the free time, I would totally do it because they're my friends, you know, but also because you want to be on set with people you're going to have fun with, and otherwise, why do it? I always, whenever I see people are in a bad mood or cranky on set, I'm just like, why are you here? Just go work somewhere else then, like, because we have the best job in the world, you know?
Right.
We are very lucky, and no matter if it's a small project or a big project, it's still, like, a pretty awesome place to be. And there are some directors that just seem so miserable when they're directing, and you're just like, or like, you know, there's directors that I've worked for that are older, that have not very well known, maybe, that, you know, are fun. They're a little more bipolar. Like, you just don't know what mood you're gonna get. Right. And it's hard to do that, to do your job where you're, like, living in fear of that person, and you have to constantly, like, cater to them, because also when you're a cinematographer, you are essentially, the best cinematographer is like, I am there to serve you. Like, I'm here to make your most amazing dreams come true and maybe do even better than you ever imagined. And that's the ultimate goal. And I truly believe every cinematographer, no matter if they're good at it or not, if they show it or not, they're really seeking approval. They want to make something amazing and they want you to love it, you know. And so, you know, some cinematographers think they're amazing and maybe a little too much, so that they make it harder for directors, like, you don't know what you're talking, you know. And I know there's cinematographers that are kind of condescending to directors as well. Like, it's both sides of the coin, and you're kind of like, is there a way to have a mutual respect? And I think the mutual respect is just what's needed on both sides. Now that I've been on both sides of it. Right.
And you say that a good cinematographer puts the story ahead of the image, which I think is really true. And that's something I think sometimes not, you know, everyone gets carried away with the beauty of the image or whatever, but the story is ultimately, you know, is what drives what
it's
you're doing.
true. And if you're, even when I was a DP, if I saw that I was taking too long on a lighting setup, or I was getting into sort of a vortex where I knew I was just, like, tweaking and it wasn't looking right, and you have to know when to, like, stop, because you're really actually just preventing the director and the actors from getting their time, and you have to just find a balance. Like, you get your time, and then once you've had your time, maybe sometimes you need a little bit more and you can get it just right, but, you know, you have to be respectful of everybody's job on set.
Right.
You know.
And how much preparation would you put in, and what form would that preparation take?
As a cinematographer? It depends on the director, but a lot of prep usually, and there was a lot of very, like, you know, I would go sometimes to museums with the director, go look at photography, watch movies, listen to music. I was fortunate to work with a lot of very creative directors, a bunch that came out of Sundance Labs and stuff that were, like, you know, once I finally got to the place where I was starting to work on stories that I thought were more in my wheelhouse, not just, like, ninja movies and stuff, but, like, dramas. And it was nice to have directors every director had a different way of expressing themselves, and what was cool as a DP was to see all these ways that the director was trying to convey what their vision was or the tone, and I enjoyed each one because everybody had their own way of doing things, and some little bit of overlap, but
right.
Yeah.
And then going into directing, that wasn't necessarily the immediate plan, but it was always obviously in the back of your mind. And you said you wanted some life experience first, which you got in spades. I'm not sure how much you want to share, but certainly you've had a lot of things challenges that you've gone through. So talk to me a little bit about that, when that point came that you felt, were you looking for material to direct, or was it just that you came across this script and you felt, I want to direct that, or how did you make that leap from cinematography to directing?
Well, I mean, I think at a certain point I had to, there were a few films that I worked on, because I worked on films of varying sizes, that, you know, when more help was needed. There were a lot of films I worked on where there was first-time directors who really didn't know a lot of what they were doing in terms of being able to manage a set and run a set and sort of, you know, just have the answer. You have to have the answer to every question. You have to have it right away. The best piece of advice I ever got from one of my fellow directors who I worked for was before I directed, and he was like, you're going to get asked hundreds of questions a day, and you just need to answer. The most important thing is that you answer right away. You just have to say yes or no. It doesn't have to be the right answer, but you have to give an answer right away. And I was like, okay. And I was like, but I'm going to still try to give the right answer, like whatever I think the right answer is. But, you know, I think when you're a DP, you get very used to going from DPing to directing was the right thing for me, because you get really used to being put on the spot in front of an entire crew and having to know, like, you know, whenever something's going wrong on set, or time's running out, or you're losing the light, or an actor's sick, or whatever it is, it's like, how are we going to cover this scene? The line producer's always coming up to the AD and the DP, like, you know, and the director, but like, you know, how are we going to fix this? And the DP is usually the person who's like, okay, well, we can do this, X, Y, and Z. I think this is what we do, depending on the DP. That's the kind of DP I was, where I was like, if people were looking for an answer, I had it. If they didn't, you know, I had an option for them, or several options. And anytime I would walk onto a set, I would always know the minute I got into the room exactly which way I would look and where I would set things if it were up to me. And so once you have all that, once you've done that enough times, you have so much more confidence, and I think going in as a director, and I think because those sort of last few films before I directed, I was sort of a big resource and a support to the director in that way. The producers or writers or whatever saw, and they were like, you should really think about directing. And I don't think it's because I was ever stepping on anyone's toes. It was more just like, if people wanted an answer, if people wanted an opinion or an answer, or a way to fix something, I could always offer it. And I tried to do that whenever it was needed, and only then and only then. And there was a film I worked on in Austria where the director was a little bit more interested in the visuals than in the story, and the script wasn't very strong. So at a certain point, the producer who was also a writer, he and I were rewriting the script, and it was so weird. And he was like, you know, you should really think about directing. And I was like, yeah. I was like,
too busy writing to think about directing right now.
I'm too busy writing this movie that I'm DPing. It was like so weird. And I was like, yeah, I was like, maybe. But I also, to me, it was the prospect of directing was very scary, because it's much easier to hide behind your director as a cinematographer. Every movie that I took, I always believed firmly, this movie is going to be big. This movie is going to be great. Because, you know, I always tried to work on things that I believed in. So I would be fiercely protective of my director's movies, and really insulted if the movie wasn't received well. And like, even if I thought, okay, maybe I wouldn't have done this way, or, you know. But it's true, though, that at the end of the day, you could always say, well, at least the movie looked good, you know, like, put it on my reel. Nobody saw it, but like, you know, I can have this actor on my reel. Yeah. And, you know, you kind of you see how hard it is for other people, and you're like, you know, how vulnerable directors are putting themselves out there and putting their voice out there and having people judge them. And it's just like, sounds horrible, you know? Yeah. Like, to me it sounded horrible. I was like, I don't want to be like people to, maybe I should, because what if I suck at it? And then people will be like, you should just keep your day job, you know? Yeah. And then you're gonna like sort of sheepishly like go back to being a cinematographer. And I didn't really want to, I also wasn't sure I wanted to stop being a cinematographer, because I love cinematography. So anyway, he was like, I'm going to find a script for you. I'm going to find something for us to do together. And I was like, sure, yeah, right. Because as we all know, everybody says a lot of things in this business and don't often keep their word. But he did send me 5 different scripts, and eventually the one I read, that kind of really caught my attention was Meadowland, and it was because of one scene in the script really that I read that I was just like, that really captures a cinematic moment that I haven't seen in a movie before, and I felt like, yeah, I could do this. It felt like a comfortable place for me to start because the storytelling would be reliant more on being emotional and observational. And so then I was like, all right, maybe I'll give it a try. But I really pushed it off for as long as possible. Like, the producer, Matt, was like, we're going to get this made. We're going to get it made within the year. And I was kind of like, I don't know if I'm, ready to do this. And I had another script sent to me to direct by a writer that I had worked with. But that one, I felt like the script had a lot of problems. And this one, it was like, all right, this is a story that's kind of complete. Maybe not everyone's going to like it or want to live in this world, but I kind of find it challenging. And I was like, the goal would be to tell us, to show grief in a way that hasn't been shown on film before, at least show it in the way that I feel about it. And by that point, I didn't know very much, but my dad had passed away, and I think at that point I started to feel a little bit more confident, like, okay, I could take on a movie. And interestingly, before we started shooting Meadowland, somewhere in the pre-production process, before we actually got financing, but we already had Olivia Wilde attached, who, by the way, came after us to do the role because she found the script. She got the script from her agent, and she was looking to do. There are a lot of actresses and actors out there who get sort of stereotyped in their roles, as you know, and they're looking to do something where people look at them in a different way, and that's a huge opportunity for filmmakers, because if you have like a great, really compelling script and like this big actress who usually is in, she's cast as the eye candy, but you believe like, hey, there may be another side to her, but people have never given her a chance, you could get financing. And we didn't get very much money, but we got enough to make the movie. But before it all started going, I ended up getting diagnosed with cancer, stage 2 squamous cell carcinoma, which is a tumor on the base of my tongue. And it was right after I finished shooting this HBO series, Looking, and then I went to Kamermaj in Poland, and I discovered a lump in my neck. And it was like, just right in the middle of everything. And ended up, we didn't have financing yet, but it ended up that I did my treatment over the course of 3 months, the beginning of 2014. And then we got financing right after I completed my treatment, because I pitched like pretty much from the bed because couldn't really talk. I said to Olivia and the producer Matt, I was like, should we tell the financiers that I just finished treatment for my cancer? And they were like, no, because you're gonna be fine. But I wasn't gonna.
Who needs a doctor?
Yeah, you don't need a doctor. And I wasn't gonna find out whether or not I was in remission for like another few months in June. And then, so I was like, okay, this sounds good. I guess like that's indie filmmaking. You're just like, I got the money, but So I wasn't worried it was gonna be a bad result, but until probably like the last 48 hours before I found out. But then we ended up, I had like a feeding tube, I had all this stuff, and probably in like around end of July, got the feeding. In June I found out I was in remission. End of July I got the feeding tube out, and then we were shooting Meadowland, and I think we started August 18th. And so we did. It was cool because it was like all these people that I worked on crew with a lot, so it was all my friends were helping me make it, and I DP'd it and directed it, and there was a moment I was going to hire another DP, and then at not the last minute, but like I was just like, you know what, I think this transition into directing is going to be easiest for me if I observe this movie the way that I'm used to doing it, which is with my eye on the viewfinder, and it was definitely the best decision.
Yeah. I mean, I really envy the way that gives you an intimacy and control, that you can just respond yourself. But I imagine you must have had to prepare everything to be in that space then that you could just respond. But it must, like, was there, I mean, the responsibility is equally huge then, because it all rests on your shoulders, literally, all the choices that you're making, both in the moment and in terms of preparation and everything. So how was that in terms of just the responsibility?
Well, I mean, I remember the first scene we were shooting, and it's like this scene with Olivia's character going through a filing cabinet looking for file on one of her students. It was something super easy. And we were also I was shooting anamorphic for the first time as well.
Right, wow.
And I remember I started to like push into her, and my AC, who I worked with for years, was like, And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, you gotta stay like 4 feet away. I was like, what? Like, there were like so many surprises. And then I was like, oh yeah, now I gotta think about this character, which of course I'd done tons of work for a year beforehand with Olivia on it. But it was like trying to figure out, I'd always been around directors on set, but you don't hear what the directors, you don't always hear what they say to the actors, so you don't really know, like, how do I speak to an actor, how do they want to be spoken to? And luckily I already had a relationship with Olivia, but there were a lot of other actors in that movie, and that was one of the most intimidating things was, oh, okay, not only am I responsible for the aspect I'm usually responsible for, but now I have to worry about making the scene, really making it work, and making sure that I'm getting everything, is this the right moment? I think the biggest thing I did on Meadowland, which I don't do anymore, which was I stuck to sort of the plan I had in my head, like this is the scene where this happens, this is the scene where that happens. Not so much so, like I had a plan that I didn't want anyone in the movie to cry until the scene where she gets a phone call, because I didn't want it to be a movie about people crying, because I don't think grief is about people crying. I think grief is a totally different thing. So I had that plan, and of course there were many other moments where things happened, and I just let them happen. So I didn't try to stop stuff from happening, but I just mean in terms of realizing that like in a moment you might need a light moment, and I did try to put some scenes in like that, but I do more now that I've been through the edit of several projects like that. I do more kind of knowing that maybe this moment where I think the character really has to have an emotional breakthrough, it might need to be more quiet and internal rather than, it could go any way. Like you don't know what's going to happen in the edit. As much as you try, it always becomes a different thing. And so the biggest thing I learned on the first movie was that whole thing. But I think the first moment when I was dealing with the kid, I had that kid, Ty Simpkins, who was great. He'd been Jurassic World and all this stuff, but he was playing a kid with Asperger's, and that was really tricky too. And I was thinking that first day while I was like shooting and directing, and I was like, is it too late for me to call one of my DP
Why did this
friends?
seem such a good idea on paper?
It didn't seem like such a good it didn't seem like such a good idea in that moment. But once we got through that day, at the end of the day, I was like, okay, I think I can do this. It's all about time. It's all about time management, and when you have a really good AD, you can, do that.
Great,
so.
Yeah, it's an amazingly strong film. I don't know how many people have seen it, but I just thought it was extraordinary, just the way that you bring us into that world, and we're so close to all the characters. There's so much empathy with them and what they're going through, and the use of music and sound really intensifies that at times. It's incredible. So tell me about The Handmaid's Tale. I mean, this is obviously like an event in all our lives. I mean, I haven't read, everywhere you looked, there was a review of The Handmaid's Tale. Everybody was talking about it, everybody was watching it. It was totally iconic in every sense, and it was lovely and reassuring to know that a television series could enter our lives and have that impact still in this day and age. So tell me, first of all, your relationship maybe to the book and the original source material.
I mean, I read the book in college, and it was probably one of the only books I actually remembered or enjoyed reading or retained, because I just wasn't the best student in the world. But I remembered it, and so when I think I remembered it just because it freaked me out so much. And it's an really easy read, even though it seems like every other sentence in the book is super profound. But it's just like you can totally read it in a day. So when I heard after I did Meadowland, I actually automatically went back to DPing to go shoot the show Vinyl, because I just couldn't help it. I wanted to shoot that show. And my agents were like, oh, you have to start looking at TV stuff. And I was like, oh, I don't want to direct TV because I know what TV directors go through. At least in Europe, I think it's very different. It's probably more what I would like. But in America, the TV director is just like a nobody. Nobody cares what you think. You're basically carrying out, you're doing someone else's bidding, essentially, depending on who you're working for. And I didn't like that at all. And I knew from being a DP in TV for so many TV shows, I was like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be an episodic director. And so it took them a while to like convince me to go look at TV stuff, because I was like, I would only want to do a pilot if anything. And I'm not going to get a pilot because I'm not anybody, you know. And they, before I met with, I was doing sort of the rounds, meeting with people, and they sent me the Handmaid's Tale pilot from, they were like, oh, we just want you to see what kind of cool things that Hulu is doing right now, because they're a new, you know, this new streaming service. And I read it, and I was like, and they were like, but this is actually out to a really big director. That's what they had said. They told me it was out to, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'm really, I guess it was out to like Ridley Scott or something. And I was like, why am I reading this? And they were like, we just want you to see what's out there. And I was like, okay. So then I read it, and I was like, oh, why did I read that? It's because it was so good, and I knew that I just, like, it's that moment when you read something and you're like, I could totally do this.
Yeah.
Because I think that everybody has that feeling when they read certain things where they're just like, oh yeah, I know I could make this really amazing. Like, and you don't even know exactly what it would be, but you just have that gut feeling, like, this is my bag, you know? And I was like, well, if I was ever gonna do a pilot, it would be this one. And so, you know, I met with them. And my agent's like, well, you know what? You should just ask them about it when you meet with them. I'm like, yeah, but that's kind of lame. And then I met with them, and they weren't even like, I wasn't even on their radar at all for that kind of. They were like, maybe you want to direct an episode of Gypsy or of something else or whatever. And I was like, yeah. I was like, but you know what's really great? The Handmaid's Tale. They're like, oh yeah, we know. Yeah, it's great. It's great, isn't it? I'm like, yeah. And I'm like just. And I just started talking about different scenes and like, you know, just what it makes you think of. And they were like, yeah, it's really cool. But I was just this unknown quantity, so why would they? So then it took many months, but I kept checking in and being like, do they have somebody yet? Do they have somebody? And then eventually I saw in the trades that they had cast Elisabeth Moss as Offred. And I was like, okay, that's amazing. Now I want to do it even more. And I had worked with her on Meadowland. She played sort of like a crackhead mom, which she was great at. And I emailed her when I saw that announcement in the trades, and I was just like, because, you know, like, why not? I'm not like emailing her like, hey, can you get me a job? But I wanted her to know wanted to congratulate her, and then also be like, hey, I've been trying to pitch on this thing. And she was on top of the lake too. She was on top of the lake, and she couldn't. She didn't respond right away, and she always has this like outgoing vacation email on every shoot. And I didn't think much of it, but like about 2 weeks later, a week later, my agents called me and they're like, they want you to pitch on Handmaid's Tale. And I was like, what? And they were like, in 4 days. And I was like, what? Like, I'm not even ready. So I was about to go off and direct an episode of *Halt and Catch Fire*, which was my first TV episode. And I spent like all this 4 days, like kind of holed up in my apartment, just listening to music that's very dark.
I heard there was one song in particular you played on a replay that was...
There was one song I just kept playing on. The first place I usually start is with images, or it depends on the project. Some projects I'll put together, I'll make a playlist first that makes me think of the movie, and then some projects I do it with images. So this one I did it with images and the playlist at the same time, but there was a song that I had heard that was like this cello piece, and called Erupting Light, and we put together a bunch of images with quotes from Margaret's book, and that were just really made me feel very emotional. And I was playing that song on repeat, and I was just like sitting there at my computer like crying. And my family's like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm just really like, I'm just making this lookbook. Sorry, you know.
Is it true that I read that it was somewhere between 72 and 100 pages? That kind of original lookbook or pitch document that you came up with.
It was 72
incredible.
pages.
72 pages.
I mean,
wow.
let's be honest, most of them were images. It wasn't like there was 72 pages of writing.
Yeah.
It was probably about like 10 pages of writing, but like, you know, you just want to set up the tone. I wanted to set up the way I saw it, and so I wanted to give as much information as possible. It was the first lookbook I made where I really described with words what I wanted to do. So I did a whole, the whole section that you do it on, the characters, and then a whole section on the tone, and a whole section on the look and the sound design and the music and the editing, and I wrote pages and pages about everything just because I knew I already had in my head what I was very inspired by this idea. So whether it was right or wrong, I just wrote down all the things I thought it would do, or how would I do the flashbacks versus the present day in Gilead, and also just thinking about ways that it hasn't been done before, but also keeping in mind that this story has to be consumable for television audience. And so I did make that 72-page lookbook, and a friend of mine had seen it and said, you should make this a hardcover book. And I was like, oh my God, I'm leaving in a day to go to Atlanta. So my assistant took the lookbook and got it printed up for me, and we sent it to the showrunner, and then sent all the digital copies to everybody else. And I don't think the hardcover version is what nailed it, but I don't think something like that hurts.
Yeah.
If you did really great visuals and you have ideas in there, it's kind of nice because it, whatever. It was $200, and I was like, if I don't get the job, at least I know I tried everything possible. I really wanted it. And then I met with them, and they ended up offering me the first 3 episodes instead of the pilot.
Right, okay.
It was
That's
just
amazing.
the pilot I was interviewing for. Right. And I was like, okay, and my agents were like, no, wait, you don't have to do 3. You just need to do the pilot, and then you get out of there and we can do something else. And I was like, no, I have to do all 3, because if I leave after the pilot, the show won't stay the same. And I'm a total micromanager, control freak, and so probably most people in here. And I was like, if I leave and then it changes, it's weird with TV, because you don't want people to bite off your style and steal all your techniques, but at the same time, if you're making a TV show, you want it to sort of remain the same. And having DP'd so many other TV series, I saw what happened after my pilot director stopped directing, and then the new directors would come in and try to change things. And I just thought, well, if I do the first 3, I could really embed my vision and leave a mark. Whether or not it stays the same afterward doesn't really matter, because then I've basically made a feature.
Right.
Right.
And in terms of the creative control and the collaborating with the other directors that come on board, how does that work? Do you have much involvement with them? Would you sit down and go through everything and talk through the scripts that they'll be directing, or once you're done year 3, do they then just take over, or did they see your lookbook, or how does that actually work?
Well, I think it's probably different on every show, but on this show, they did use my lookbook as a reference and kind of a Bible, and gave it to the other directors. The first few directors that came on while I was still shooting, because my run went on for a while, they definitely wanted to meet and talk to me and pick my brain. Not necessarily about how did you do that thing, more everybody was different. Some directors wanted to know oh, how did you work with this actor? How did you get this out of it? They wanted to know things like that, practical things, or, and some, when I met with Floria Sigismondi, and, we talked a lot about kind of just going wild with the, looking at scenes and not shooting them in the obvious way, and we just talked a lot about what we both like to do. And so it was nice, because I got to meet with her and Mike Barker. Beyond that, the other directors, I was pretty much out of there after that, and I EP'd only the first 3 episodes. But they did take that, and they took it very seriously, the style, and they tried to keep it, I think, as much as possible, even though at the end of the day, when one person does something, it's always going to evolve when it goes to someone else's hands, but then that's the beauty of TV. Right. You get a fresh voice, which is not a bad thing. Yeah,
Sure. And I think the thing that really stands out for me is the tone. I think the tone in every episode is so strong. And do you want to talk a little bit about that? How you're dealing with very difficult material at times. You're dealing with people who are imprisoned, so in that sense, they're dramatically passive. That's a real challenge, to try and make that story active, and that their actions are, you understand the logic of what they're doing, that they're not just passive. How you keep the suspense, because you're just gripped the whole way through the whole episode of each episode. You're kind of gripped and you're full of dread about what might happen, but totally engaged. And even though what you're watching is uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think, with Handmaid's Tale, we were like, we don't really know if this is going to catch on, because also there is that thing, that's why my agents were kind of like, you don't want to do all 3 episodes. The second episode, because we only had outlines of episodes
Right.
2 and 3, and I had to go on the outline. My agent's like, I thought you should do all 3, and then second episode, it's like literally 2 women giving birth the whole episode. I don't know what you're going to do with that. And I was like, I don't really know what I'm going to do with that either. I'm like, but I feel like I should, you want to take on a challenge sometimes. Sometimes you have to do something. You don't exactly know what it's going to turn out to be, but you feel like maybe you've got an idea at least for, a general idea for what it would be. But I also just knew that, like, because of the way Margaret Atwood sets up these scenarios that are just so bizarre and disturbing, that there was going to be tension there. And the tension was going to come from really great actors. But all our actors weren't like, Lizzie Moss is a very special actress. She can, when I needed to do like 10 takes with another actor, it would be okay, even though we were shooting an episode in 8 days, it would be okay because she could do it in 1 if I needed her to. And the thing with her is, so when you have great, you just have to bring everyone else up to that level. And then also think about what's the most disturbing thing about this moment, obviously this could be totally mundane, or this could be a moment where, you feel like the devil is in the room with them or something. It's just like, even, I always love this scene, the first scene where it's a flashback where she meets Serena Joy and the commander for the first time. And I just thought it's just so many great things that the actors do in that moment. And of course, I don't make the actors do all those things, it's also, a lot of it is finding it in the edit, finding those moments of like the twitch of an eye that they do, and just something that just shows this flicker of this other thing that maybe they're like not trying purposely to show the other person in the scene, and just add, I'm very lucky to have such a great cast. But yeah, I think that what was cool too was having the space to, in a TV series, have those silent moments, but that could create like a quiet dread. And then utilizing the sound design, because sound design was a really big thing for me in Meadowland, and then I brought it over to Handmaid's Tale because I got really excited about sound design. That was probably the biggest most exciting thing for me about directing, was that I could finally affect the sound. And sound design can really change the entire trajectory of a scene or a movie, and take a moment that might just feel normal and make it completely weird, in a way that's interesting, you change the tone. So
it's also the point, I think, when you've been through all of the humiliation of the edit and the assembly and all those things, and you've seen everything, you've cut out everything that you can, and it's the point at which you actually start improving it again.
Yeah.
So I love the sound and the sound designers. Thank you. But really, they can create magic and bring something to life, and it's kind of like a fun time. And you're really creative, and I think they never ever get the credit they deserve.
Well, you know what? Actually, I think for me though, for sound design, I do like very intricate sound design with my editor before I get to the actual final mix. And I think maybe part of it was just impatience. Like I couldn't even, just in this last movie I've been editing this year. It's a movie about the apocalypse, and every time we went into a room and the tone in the room just felt like a regular place, I couldn't have it. I couldn't handle it. I was like, and my editor, who edited Meadowland, who's so great, Madeline, she's the same way about sound. She reacts off of sound as well. And so she and I actually ended up with 37 tracks of sound in just our edit. Now, we haven't gotten into actually editing with our sound designer yet. So we have that, so sound design, when I'm saying sound design, I mean actually like while I'm editing, because in order to get your vision across, especially like even in Handmaid's Tale, those scenes, the scene in the ceremony, all those different layers of sound it's like all this different layers of music, and that we did that in the actual edit before we went to final because we wanted them to know exactly what we wanted. And so part of that is I'm always wanting an editor who's really good with sound, cutting sound, because I'm going to be putting weird stuff in that doesn't belong there. Like, you know, the tone of a room might be the sound of a cave, even though it's a library or something, you know?
Right, yeah. And also, obviously, the palette is extraordinary on that, the reds and the blues and all the colours that you use. So how did you develop that colour palette?
Well, I mean, as a cinematographer, I always knew that I didn't always know. I remember the moment when I realized that some movies look like crap that I shot because maybe I didn't interact enough with the production design and the costume design to affect it, and the director didn't realize. But it's really like you have to all work together, and then the movie or the show will look better. And it wasn't. I learned everything very organically. No one taught me, so it was like I learned by trial and error. And eventually, I realized like, oh, if I control the colors that are in the frame as a cinematographer, then it's going to look the way I know it would look best, or if I advise the right thing to do. And so, on Handmaid's Tale, my cinematographer Colin Watkinson, who is amazing, he and I really agreed on what a color palette was going to be. But I kind of came to the table with like knowing with some references for Technicolor red and blue that I thought would be good references for it. And our costume designer Anne Crabtree, you know, everybody had different ideas, but Bruce, who was our showrunner, was just like, I defer to Reed because she was a cinematographer and whatever color she wants, blah, 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 blah. So he was very cool about that. So I gave some photo references to the costume designer, and then, you know, we tested everything in all different lights and made sure that, because red's tricky, you know, especially on digital, and you want to find the right red that in sun looks great as well as in shadow, because it becomes two completely different colors. And also you want the red to sort of complement the blue, because those two colors are going to be together in every frame. So you should take that opportunity, you know. So it was a big, and then whatever the backgrounds were. So our production designer, Julie Berghoff, who's also amazing, we also decided to do a really crazy thing with Serena Joy's room, which was, even though she's wearing this teal color, she also had teal walls, which is, because I also think it's very cool when somebody's wearing something that sort of almost blends into the background, but maybe not quite, or is it just a different shade? Or so we all really worked together like a team to make sure that, like, knowing what people were going to be wearing in every environment and how it was going to be set off against the backgrounds, and it was all purposeful choices. You know?
Yeah, and also similarly with the way that you use the camera in terms of like the very, very close up on the faces at times, the handheld, and then the very big formal symmetrical compositions that are so dramatic. And again, that contrast is really, really effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's trying to make it like a POV thing too, to be in her perspective. Yeah. And that was the idea with that.
You feel close to her in every scene.
Yeah, but also trying to have some scope. Obviously, like, they were very concerned, the network and the studio were very concerned about, please make sure that the show has scope, because they had seen Meadowland, and you know, Meadowland's very intimate, so they didn't want it to just be intimate
that's interesting.
and sad.
So that's something, yeah.
But I knew that it was going to have scope, because we were always talking about drone shots and things like that, and also wanting it to be, you know, sort of create very graphic images to juxtapose against the, you know, the sort of emotional camera. Right.
And was it hard to not be the cinematographer on this? Like, how was that relationship then working with Colin?
It was great. I mean, I think the first week of pre-production was a little where he didn't know what. There's always that unknown, I think, that a DP has, where they're with the director who was a DP, where they're like, what's going to happen when I get on set? Is this former DP going to come and like just take over the lighting, take over everything? And that's not my style. I'm just going to find, like, I wanted to just download all the information I could to him beforehand, so that he would know, you know, like, I wouldn't have to say anything on set. So we just had a ton of references. But the first week, I think there was a moment where he made a joke where it was like, leave your DP hat at home. And my assistant was like, oh no, he didn't. And then she was like, you should just wear your Ari hat to work tomorrow just to fuck with him, And I was like, no, I'm not gonna do that. But the best thing to do is just talk it out with people. So I said to him, I go, look, I just want you to know that like the reason why you're here is because there's things you do that I don't do, and because of how much I admire your work. And I think that this is gonna be a hybrid of both of what we can do as cinematographers. And the handheld naturalistic aesthetic was more mine, and his was more of like a glossy, grander kind of spectacle. And I think Handmaid still turned out to be a true hybrid of both of those things. And he was really cool about letting me, I told him straight up, like when I work with a DP, I'm like, I'm gonna wanna operate handheld sometimes. I just do, because I'm very particular about that, and most people can't do it like the way that I want it done. I'm not saying I do it the best. I just, for me, it's what I want, and I know what I want, and that is a really big sense of control for a director because in a moment, you could just go in, you don't have to have that much of a plan. You go in and you just get to react off of the actors, and it's like almost the most pure thing. So it's hard sometimes, unless you have a cinematographer or a camera operator that you really trust and who knows you inside and out and is just like totally on the plane with you. And Colin is amazing at lighting and at all these, he's just really, really good with a lot of stuff. And what was great was he seemed like the type of guy who would have a huge ego, and actually he's totally egoless.
Right.
And he didn't have a problem to let me operate the camera handheld. So for most of the handheld in my first 3 episodes, I was operating, and he was cool about it, and
And just on a practical level, how many shoot days did you have per episode, and how many days editing per episode?
We had 12 days for the pilot, and then we had 8 days for episode 2, 8 days for episode 3, and then editing. I probably got more, usually you have 4 days to edit, but I probably eked out a few more days just because I had that, producer credit. So I was able to stay involved. So I was horrified once I did my edit with the editor that it only went to one of the producers and the showrunner, and no one else saw it from the network in the studio, and then they got to like recut it, and I was like, what is happening? Like, this is crazy to me. But what was kind of great about getting the EP credit was that then by being really collaborative and diplomatic, I was able to they knew how important it was to me, so I was able to stay involved and sort of give notes almost on their cut. And then I was also in contact with, I was close with with Hulu, with the execs at Hulu, and, they were really great about feedback and if they're, and Lizzie Moss and I were both very involved. She was a producer on it as well. And so we would, sometimes when there was something that she and I didn't agree with, she'd be like, all right, I get that one, you get that one. Right. And then we would tag team. Yeah.
Good.
I'm here right now making a movie called The Rhythm Section, which is it's a movie about a female assassin, a woman who becomes a female assassin, and a reluctant a person who never would normally do that, and she kind of goes through this terrible tragedy with her family and has this downward spiral, and when we meet her, she's basically just at rock bottom, and we don't know who she is or why, and you sort of learn about her as she goes, and she ends up going on this kind of crazy journey, this crazy trajectory to get revenge for what happened to her. And what's interesting about it is, or what I thought was interesting about it was it's based on a book written by this writer named Mark Burnell. He did a book series about this assassin, Stephanie Patrick, and he did such a great job of telling a story that was very, it felt like it got really into this female's head, and I thought, well, this is an interesting opportunity because it would be like doing an action film, but also that has much more to offer psychologically. So, I saw kind of an opportunity. She's not very good. It was very messy. So, when she starts to become an assassin, it doesn't in most movies, somebody goes through a change like that, and then instantly they're like amazing kind of, and you don't see any real, the struggle is not, doesn't feel very earned, or where they get to, and it felt like it was more real and raw, and the violence is messy and not perfect, and it wouldn't be well choreographed. It would be great to have an action movie where there aren't a million cuts, and it's more like what really happens when you're in that situation. Like, you can't shoot someone because it's not in human nature to do that,
Right.
and like
It's harder than people think.
it is, and maybe making people think a little bit more. Like in most of these movies, people are, tons of people are getting shot all the time, and you're like, but what I really want to know is, how does that person sleep at night, and they gloss over all of that stuff. And so this felt like an opportunity to sort of psychologically explore like how difficult it would be for a regular person to suddenly have to do that.
Right.
And actually that doesn't work,
Right.
So.
Okay, well, please, can we have your questions, please? And I'm sorry that we've eaten into your time to interact, so please feel free to ask Reed what you'd like to ask.
Just a quick one. Which was the scene in Meadowland in the script that made you want to direct that film? You mentioned one in particular.
I was thinking about that.
There was this scene where she wakes up and then she remembers something in the middle of the night. She wakes up and goes to the car and finds the animal cracker from her son.
Yeah, it's such a powerful scene. I mean, it's just everything.
Yeah, when I read that, I was just like, oh, I know I can make anything happen with this
Really?
writer,
Yeah,
so.
it was so powerful.
So just curious, in terms of what you're saying about directing episodic in the US, do you find any difference in working with showrunners who are directors themselves, like say Chris Cantwell on How to Catch Fire, as opposed to Bruce on Handmaid, who isn't a director?
Well, actually, it's funny, when I worked with Chris, he hadn't directed yet. He actually was directing his first episode the same season as me, because I did season 3, episode 8, so I think he did like maybe the finale or something that season. But either way, Chris and Chris, the showrunners on Halt Catch Fire, they're amazing because they don't think they know everything, and they're very inspired by the creativity of all the directors that they have and that they bring to the table. And what they do on Halt and Catch Fire, which is so cool, is they actually push, that's probably the most freedom an episodic director could have, is what I had on that show. Because when you come in, the producers also are amazing on that show. And they're like, we just want your vision. So go crazy. And that's how Chris and Chris are, and that's how Chris Cantwell is. And they could not be more gracious and easy to work with. And Chris we've been trying to find another project to do together where they write for me to direct, but they were just not oppressive at all. They were very much like great collaborators who just kind of, they weren't trying to direct the episode at all by any means. And actually Chris Rogers was the one who was on the episode with me a lot because Chris Cantwell was prepping his first episode to direct. And so they were easy. And Bruce was different because his whole background is totally different, coming from writing so many episodes of TV and everything. And, it's funny because Bruce has the way that he sees things. He sees things very particularly, but he's not necessarily a director, but he can explain anything and he can talk to actors, and he's really great with all that. But there was a lot of stuff, he just handed over to me and he was like, that's your area of expertise, you go for it and do that. And, of course there were moments where we disagreed on lines or the way that a line, should be said, or even editorially. But what I found with Bruce was that he was incredibly collaborative, and he needed to explore things to know if they worked or not. And so we just found our own rhythm of working together that way.
Any other questions?
Hi. How's your experience been working in Ireland, and would you come back?
It's been great, I have to say. I've been here since September, living here, but I was here all throughout the summer, actually. But the crew is amazing. I love everybody in the crew. They're super hardworking. Everybody really, really cares, which is it's not always the case, you know, and also just the funniest people. Like, you know, I like to laugh a lot on set, and so I found it's very easy to do, and so it just makes it just such a great atmosphere. I would totally come back in a second because it's just good vibes. And that's like the most important thing for me when I'm on, you know, working, so.
You got a question?
In a room full of writers and directors, I just noticed a trend there where you're talking of a number of directors that are coming from other skills. Like you came from DP, there's quite a lot of directors coming from special effects because they can make a brand and make themselves very present, exploiting their skills or using their skills. Have you anything to say about that, the way the directing's becoming a multi-skilled process rather than just the one element?
Well, I mean, you know, for me, it worked really well to have that experience because I wasn't just coming in. It's not that I think directors can come from anywhere. It just depends. For me, my confidence and knowledge was built upon shooting so many films for other people because I just learned. It just became, because when you're on enough sets and, you know, so that was what was good about what I had, was being the director's right-hand person all the time and like getting into their head and helping them solve problems and also seeing how things were done, maybe seeing how some things shouldn't be done. It was very helpful to me. But that being said, you know, I think a director could come from anywhere. It was just like, for me, it probably made me a stronger director than if I had just started out. And I didn't really even plan it. It was like kind of blind luck in terms of, I just thought I would DP, and I was like, maybe one day I'll go back to the directing idea, but I just don't feel confident enough right now. But, you know, I'll make all these directors entrust their movies to me. I'm confident enough to do that part. But, you know, once you do something enough times for someone else, when you get onto a set, like the set I'm on now is such a big budget compared to I made a movie in the spring that was $3.4 million budget, and then this budget is like 40 or 50 million, and I have to say, it's not that much different. Things go slower on the bigger budget. There's a lot more political stuff to get through, and a lot more, there's, of course, it's like, you know, there are moments where you're like, I feel back to that movie I was on in the spring where Peter Dinklage had to change his clothes in the homeowner's bathroom and they were taking a shower, so he couldn't get in there, and, you know. But of course, then you have all these other resources on such a large budget. I guess what I'm saying is working as a DP for so long, it wasn't daunting for me to jump into that because I had already DP'd things that were bigger operations, so I didn't feel uncomfortable, you know.
Any more questions?
Hi, sorry. I'm an actor, and I was just wondering, with a lot of directors that I work with, they'll say to me things like, you know, oh, it's like a dialogue and it's a collaboration, and I really want you to kind of tell me what you think. But I was just wondering, in your experience, has it ever come to a point where you kind of go, yeah, okay, that's enough collaboration now. Here's my vision, or in your experience?
You know what? No, I actually don't. There's a lot of. Every actor is different, obviously, as you know, and some actors have a lot more, they want to talk it out a lot, they want to talk about the scene a ton, and then other actors are like, just tell me what you want. You know, like Luke Wilson was kind of like, he just wanted direction in like 3 sentences or less, and then like, you know, Olivia Wilde, like, we could talk about it forever, or, you know, like the actors that I'm working with now on this movie are just like, I have to shut it down at some point. You have to have control over the set. So you have to be wary of time, but I actually like it because 9 times out of 10 with the actor will bring up something that I didn't think about because they're just really concentrating on that one person and how they see everything, and it's actually really beneficial, I feel like, to hear the actor's thoughts. And then there's some stuff they say and you're like, in your mind you're like, all right, I'm gonna throw that piece away, but like this is actually the point of that, and I didn't realize, and it's a great thing, a resource for me, I think.
Any more questions? No? Okay. Well, one. Go ahead.
I was just interested in, you mentioned how many days you shot, say, the pilot of The Handmaid's Tale, and then talking about your own Meadowland in terms of being, working on quite a tight schedule. I'm wondering how much of a shift over in your working practice is it going from something that's shot in, like, say, 2 or 3 weeks into something that's shot over 2 or 3 months? How do you sort of modulate your stamina and your expectations of what you're going to achieve each day?
Well, I mean, other than TV, like I've been on TV shows that shot for over 6 months, so that's like a different thing, like having DP, but as a director, yeah, it's different. And most of all of the things that I've directed were in very short schedules. So Meadowland was 22 days, Handmaid's Tale was 12, 8, and 8, and then the last movie I did, I think we're alone now, we shot in 24 days. This movie is 56 days. And I'm just like, I like short schedule better, personally. I don't like all this time, too much time to think about stuff, too much time for people to have ideas, You just want to kind of get in and get out. On the one hand, it's pretty amazing. I've never had the experience of only shooting like 2 pages a day before. It's the most luxurious thing ever, but you'd be surprised. And I'm like, oh, I'll finish that in a snap, but then you'd be surprised. Like, I fit into the box I'm put into. So, but also, if I was getting everything right away, it would go much quicker. But it's sort of like, it's nice to have that extra time. But I also feel like I want to get the movie done and get into the editing room. And, as much as I love shooting, I kind of, let's get to the fun part. Now I've realized I thought I would always like shooting the best, but actually I think editing is where it's at. You're just like in your cozy room with your editor, and you only got to argue with one person, or maybe 2, yourself and the editor. And I have the best relationship with my editor. We just talk over each other like all the time. She'll talk for like 5 minutes while I'm talking, and I'll be like, Madeline. And my family's like, what? Why did she let you? And I'm like, no, you don't understand. We just like married, but that's the best part for me. Be in your pajamas and.
Well, can I just say, first of all, congratulations as well. We didn't get to talk about it. Your latest film just got into Sundance.
Yeah,
I think We're Alone Now
yeah.
with Peter Dinklage and Elle Fanning. So congratulations on that.
Thank
That's
you.
very exciting. And you did say that film is the one film that you feel really proud of and you feel is quite a personal attachment to. So I really look forward to seeing that when it comes out here.
Yeah, I'm excited about that one. It's very weird. Well, I guess that one is, I just feel connected to it because it really is just like my ideal sort of genre of a movie. It's not really a genre though, but hopefully you guys will get to see it. Hopefully.
And also we look forward to seeing the rhythm section as well. And Kate McCullough asked how you were getting on shooting in Ireland with its ever-changing weather. So we look forward to seeing how you cope with that, like we've done here for generations. But anyway, I just say despite the statistics and all the depressing news we hear, that you have said that now is, there's never been a better time for Irish filmmakers. So I just want us all to remember that. And with you leading the way forward, I think we're all in good hands. So thank you very much. Thank you.